Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's workshop on college and COVID. We're discussing the impact of COVID on the college application process, as well as the financial aid process, and how that's going to impact students going forward. My name's Vicki Vollweiler. I'm the founder of College Financial Prep, and I help families navigate the road to college in terms of financial aid, scholarships, and student loans. And now I'll let Eleanora introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Eleanora Ferrante. I'm the owner of Square Peg, Square Hole Coaching. I'm a college admissions and career exploration coach. When I work with high school students, the goal is to help them find those schools that make the most sense, both academically, socially, and obviously financially, which is where Vicki comes in. And it's also to take the stress out of the process so that you still like your child when this is over. So with that, we'll get started talking about some of the impacts that Vicki and I have seen this year in terms of application as well as financial aid. I'm just going to jump in and say the first thing I saw a big impact was on the academics this year. I mean, obviously remote learning, COVID's had a huge impact on the kids. Remote learning was not easy for a lot of students. Some flourished, they were happy to be home and out of the craziness of school, but for the most part, it was really hard on kids. So, a lot of kids, the grades have gone down. They've got pass fails on their transcripts, right? And if you didn't have a good, strong foundation last year in math, and now you're taking the next level up in math, well, this year is hard for some of those kids as well. So, it's been interesting to watch that as the students try and navigate. I think what's really important, though, about looking back in terms of the impact on academics is, what did you learn about yourself, right? And I would pose this to you to ask your kids, what did you learn? What is your best space for learning? Are you an audio? Are you a visual? Are you kinetic, right? And do you do well discussion-based? Are you good at remote, right? So, because as we move forward, colleges are moving to hybrid models, to a lot more online learning. So it might open up some new doors for you in terms of what you're thinking about for college. It might close some doors for you in terms of what you're thinking about in college, right? Because you might realize that you just can't do online, or maybe you want to have that as one additional option. I look at my own daughter, some of her classes are in person, but she also takes some online, and she likes that flexibility of not having to leave she is a commuter. She likes not having to leave the house sometimes for one class in the evening when it's cold and doesn't want to go out. So it's something to think about. Right. And Vicki, what do you think in terms of the impact of the academics and on the financial side?
The financial side. So what happened when COVID first hit and impacted the college campuses, they sent all the kids home. So the schools, the financial impact for the colleges themselves, I mean, they had to refund all of that money from room and board. This was in March 2020. Then they lost any revenue from conferences. They lost revenue from, camps. They had to increase their expenditures to bolster up their online learning platforms. So the colleges got hit pretty badly. And the reason that I'm bringing that up is because, a lot of people have been complaining how the learning isn't the same. And granted, the learning isn't the same. But the colleges didn't get away scot-free either, so there have been course reduction, the number of courses being offered have been reduced. Sometimes, maybe dining halls had to close. The colleges have been impacted, and the students that are on campus feel it. And it's definitely a concern, as you who are in high school move forward, with high school students move forward and seeing what those impacts are as you're choosing colleges. It's important to be mindful of it.
Yep. Absolutely. And then the grades piece, when you think about that, the colleges are looking at your grades, right? And they're looking mostly at your core classes. I mean, it depends on what you're going for in terms of major. If you're going for photography, obviously the electives are going to be important as well, because they want to see what your grades are and things that are relevant. But I think it's going to be really important for students to make sure they're continuing to focus on improving their grades. This is a really important time to ask for help, get connected to your teachers and make sure that you're really focused on doing the best you possibly can. And now that you've learned what works and doesn't work for you. Okay. And going remote obviously also had a huge impact on activities, right? The number of options out there for the kids was dramatically reduced. And the interesting part to that for me, though, as I look at all the students I worked with, so I had 25 seniors this year, and it was a huge mix in terms of some kids just kind of shut down, right? They were like, nothing's there. I can't do anything. I'm just going to stay in my basement. But I had a lot of other kids who said, well, what can I do at this time? And so I have one student who's applying for architecture, and he went online and took all these different design courses online. And some of them were just YouTube videos, right? And they did tutorials. Other kids did community drives, whether it was toiletry drives or like diaper drives. And so they went out and they did something. I had another kid who worked with his younger sister. His parents said to him, you guys have to babysit the little ones. And so they started a camp over the summer, right? And so it was just the 3 or 4 neighborhood kids. But, so you have kids who went 2 different directions with this. I don't see anything, I can't do it. And then the others took the initiative. And so I think it's important for your students to think about, well, how did I spend my time over the last year? Because it's not going to be the traditional activities that are going to show up on your application, right? A lot of times it's going to be things that are more like hobbies. I have kids I've worked with who had to take on a lot of responsibility because their parents were first responders, healthcare workers. So their activities shifted from perhaps doing robotics in school to babysitting, but that's okay, right? So all those different experiences are important to showcase on the application, right? Because Vicki, how important are activities when it comes to the application and the merit aid piece?
Oh, of course, it's definitely very important. I was just thinking about, though, you were saying about the kids and different about their activities, and the academics impacting them moving forward. And I'm thinking to myself, well, and how were the parents impacted during that time? Did the parents, were they first responders? Were they employed? Did anything financially in the household change? Or was a household severely impacted? Did a family, member lose their job, or were they underemployed, or was there illness, or was there something? And because of COVID, I'm seeing lots of different changes, financial changes in households, and that could certainly benefit families. And it's really hugely important to discuss that, because seriously, there are families that are now able to, because of the pandemic, able to save a lot of money due to their financial situation right now. So don't think all is lost if your household happens to be in that predicament.
So Vicki made me think about something today. I had a prospect that I was talking to, and she's in that space. And she's like, I don't have a lot of money. I'm a single mom. She's actually widowed. And she was like, I don't know what to do. She's like, but I hear these rumors about this Excelsior scholarship. And she's like, I really want my kids to stay in New York. She goes, but I don't know if we qualify. I don't know how it works. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. And this applies to anyone, and it's on a, and let me say this, because you mentioned a single mom. So, and I'm a single mom too. I'm a divorced mom. Anyway, the reason that I bring all that up is that if your household earns less than $125,000 a year, that household qualifies for the Excelsior scholarship, assuming that you reside in New York State. And I don't know where everybody, in this workshop is from. We didn't get into it, but for those in New York State, the Excelsior scholarship is available. So I say $125,000 per household, because you could have one parent who earns $120,000. You could have 2 parents that earn $60,000 each. So it's per household. It has nothing to do if you're single or not single. So everybody should just be aware of that. But yeah, the Excelsior scholarship is great because it provides for free tuition. Usually a SUNY school or a CUNY school. There are some schools that will offer something similar, like Ithaca does, so there are other opportunities in New York State, but in the main, it's for SUNY and CUNY. So it's for tuition. It does not include room and board. It doesn't include fees. But right now, I want to say tuition is about $7,000, $7,500 or so per year at the SUNYs. So you multiply that by 4, it's a savings of $30,000. So definitely worthwhile to check that out and consider it.
So, and a follow-up question to it is, when you apply for Excelsior, do you do that through FAFSA? Is there a separate application for it? How does that work?
So there's FAFSA, there's TAP, and then there's Excelsior. Excelsior applications don't typically come out till like May, June, July. There's no set date, and especially with the pandemic, it's kind of been all over the place. And then, this is run through New York State, and then they were short on people. And so the past couple of years, it's been a little haphazard. Maybe going forward, it'll start to straighten out, but yeah, and then it's been a little haphazard. I always, for anybody that, registers for my newsletter or whatnot, I always send out an email when it opens up. So if you want to sign up for collegefinancialprep.com, you'll get on that email list to know when Excelsior opens.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's so many different aspects to the financial aid side. And I think people forget, or they just don't even realize just how many different applications there are. And the fact that if your situation changes, right, it is huge. So if, in this case, if your income has only come down the last 2 years, but before that was higher, right, you still qualify, right?
I mean, seriously, I don't even know what to do. So I just got off the phone with a client yesterday. 2 children, one who is a 12th grader and is applying now to schools. And the other one is currently a sophomore at Hofstra. And they had a huge financial change. And I said to him when he came to me for help with his FAFSAs, I said, no, we need to address this. I said, look at this change between 2019 and 2020, and, it was all pandemic related, and huge numbers. And he couldn't thank me enough with the savings.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I've learned for you is how important it is to submit the FAFSA, even if you don't think you're going to qualify, because you don't know what the future holds.
Exactly. So a lot of people think, oh, I'm not going to qualify. Why should I bother wasting my time? We earn too much money, blah, 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 blah. And fine, that may all be true. But your child may be applying to schools where they require having FAFSA on file just to even award merit money. So even if it's like $1,000 or $2,000, submit FAFSA just to be able to be eligible for the merit money. Also, if you want your child to have some student loans, that is also, if you apply for FAFSA, you'll have the lowest interest rate on those student loans that's in your child's name. So for freshmen, it's up to $5,500 a year. For sophomores, $6,500 a year. And for juniors and seniors, they qualify for $7,500 each year. But you have to do FAFSA. And I mean, you can earn $1 million and still qualify for those student loans at the lowest interest rates. Another thing, if you think you will qualify for need and your child wants to participate in work study, again, you do that through FAFSA to qualify for that. And I love work study programs, whether it's a traditional work study or whether it's just your child's getting a job on campus. I think it's wonderful for the kids to gain the work experience and be able to put that on their resume, to have some money in their pocket for spending money, and to have downtime in the office and be able to sit there and study and still get paid. I mean, I think it's a perfect scenario for the kids. Yeah. The last reason with FAFSA, it's like an insurance policy. If something happens in the middle of the year, I mean, heaven forbid, somebody gets hit by a bus, something happens, and there's this, huge financial change. It's possible then to have it adjusted, even middle of the year. So very important to have FAFSA on file.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And it's interesting when you say in terms of whether or not you qualify for work study to still have the job. When I look at activities for students, so I do work with students as they are leaving college and getting their first job. And it's so much more powerful to be able to say that not only did I go to school, but I worked, right? And I was in these activities. It really just shows your organization skills, time management skills, ability to juggle a lot. And it gives you an opportunity just to test the waters, right? Because in terms of, I think that's the thing that a lot of our kids have missed in the last couple of years is the ability to test the waters and see what they're really interested in, to find the activities that make a lot of sense, to help them understand, well, maybe I would love to work in a physical therapy office, but they weren't able to intern because they couldn't get in, right? And do that because nobody wanted anybody extra in their offices, or working in a business situation, whatever it might be. So as I I think about, the financial side to that too, and the merit piece, those activities a lot of times are what generates some of the merit aid, right? So if you have a kid in marching band and a school wants you in their marching band, or if you were on a team, right? So an athlete, you don't have to be top level D1 to still be able to get money as an athlete, right? I mean, there are plenty
Definitely.
of D2, D3 schools that, the D3s don't offer, athletic aid, but they offer merit aid to students who are athletes.
No, that's definitely been a route that a lot of students go for, to go to D3 and then get merit scholarships.
Right. So when I think about, moving forward, what's important for our students in high school right now, it's a time to explore, right? So clubs have started to make a comeback. Some are virtual, some are in person. Fingers crossed, even better for next year, that ability to really interact and test and see what you like. Looking for community service opportunities, right? And sometimes you have to create those on your own. Like I said about my kids who did toiletry drives or did diaper drives. But even like, I'm on the board at our library, and I know that our youth center does a lot of work providing community service hours to the kids. And it's things that they can do from home to support the community. And I think, you have to be creative, your place of worship, whether the dog shelters, right? Whatever it might be that draws you in, so that when you're applying to schools, you first of all, you have an understanding of things you like, but it also makes you just more attractive. And it's just fun. It's a way for the kids to get out and interact with other people, which they really need to do. And even looking online and taking courses online, you can do it, the big classes, but you could do things like the master class, the YouTube tutorials. There are so many different things out there through your libraries that you can do just to experience things. And I think that's really important, because when you're applying to college, you want to show that you were resilient and you figured out ways to still be active and engaged. It makes a big difference.
I think I just saw a question come through.
2 questions came up. I was going to say one is for you and one is for me. So I'm going to give you yours first, because it goes back to the Excelsior Scholarship. So a person saying, I'm a widow. I live in New York. My daughter's interested in attending Delaware University. I'm going to assume they mean University of Delaware and not Delaware State, which is the HBCU. How would Excelsior help? And would I be able to? Right, because Excelsior is only
it's out of New York State. Part of the story with Excelsior Scholarship. So not only do you need to be a New York resident, but because they're paying your tuition, they're giving you free tuition. The kids have to sign a contract agreeing to work in New York State for the 4 years afterwards. Now, if they opt not to work in New York State afterwards, it turns into a 0% interest loan, which, hey, how do you beat that? But yeah, there's a catch. They can't, you can't do it for out of New York State.
And the second half to the question is unrelated to it, but would you be able to appeal if you don't get a lot of money through FAFSA?
So it depends on the school, and it's key to be strategic when it comes to this. So can you appeal? It depends on your set of circumstances and what you mean by appeal. So I'm going to tell you a very, very quick story. My heating system had broken down. I had 2 gentlemen come over to give me estimates. I liked the second guy better, fine. I called the first guy back. I said, thank you, but no thank you. He goes, was it the price? Can I give you a better price? Now just know, colleges are like businesses. Everything could be negotiable. Now, some schools have large endowment funds, some schools have small endowment funds, some schools are public universities, some are private universities. There's more flexibility at some schools than other schools. But yes, it is possible to, negotiate. It's possible to, file an appeal due to changes in circumstances. So yes, it can be done. However, certainly can't make any guarantees that any, about what any school might give, because candidly, it may be nothing. But then again, it could be an additional $10,000 a year. You don't really know until you try, until you see what your circumstances are. And also, how much does the school want you to fill their seat? It depends on the student as well.
Right. Harvard is not giving you any extra money. I can guarantee that.
However, Harvard and the Ivies will meet your need. So if you have, if your student is Ivy League material and you have full need, they may very well meet your full need. So
Right.
it all comes down to strategy.
Right. And well, and it's interesting too, because I was in a webinar today with admissions from WPI, RIT, and Clarkson, so 3 engineering schools. And they all clearly said, we do not guarantee to meet need. We will do as best we can to give you as much as we can, but there's no guarantee. So right. It was interesting. So next question that came in actually takes us into the next impact from COVID on applications, which is the impact on testing, SAT, ACT. Many thought that given what happened 2 years ago, that the tests were going away. Well, you should all know that College Board and ACT are big businesses. They are not just going to lay down and say it's over. It's not happening, right? And so what's been interesting to me is to watch that and see the impact. So lots of schools went test optional. Lovely. So what does that mean? It means that you, as an applicant, have a choice. You can send your score or not send your score. It's up to you. And there are reasons why you would want to send it, right? So when I look at my students, I look at what's the scores they have. I look at what that looks like compared to the profile of the students at that school. If it's in that range and higher, we're sending. If it's not, we don't, right? Because we're trying to give positive data points. There are some schools that you have to send. The Florida publics and the Georgia publics, you have to send your scores. Georgetown, you have to send your scores. But if you decide you want to go to California, the University of California system is like, we're test blind, don't bother. Although you can still sneak them in, just FYI, because they will look at that for merit aid or placement purposes, right? So if you are good at taking tests, or you're good at listening to somebody as they prep you for taking tests, I always suggest to my students, go out and try it. Do it once and see. Take a practice ACT, take a practice SAT, see which one you like better, which one works for you, and then focus on one, prep for it, and take it. Because I have students where we send the scores to some, but not all of their schools. Right? It depends on it. I had a kid with a 1400 this year, did not send that to Carnegie Mellon. It wasn't going to be good for him. We sent it everywhere else though. And at Fordham, they liked that number and they were happy to give him full tuition over there. Right. So it's a great data point and some of the schools still want it. Right. So right, Vicki, are you still seeing that with merit aid?
Definitely. Especially for a family that does not want to pay full price, merit aid still, especially at large universities, they're just looking at grades and test scores and, data points to be able to say, okay, these are all the people that are in the running for merit aid and let's just move everybody else over here. So while none of our kids would want to voluntarily take the tests, it's still financially savvy to do so, to hopefully get that merit money.
Absolutely. So, and 2 of my kids, one was accepted to University of Alabama, another one West Virginia, and both of them are very upfront about it. Right? You get this number, this GPA, we give you this much.
Right.
So my kid, one of my students who had, she was like a 1450 and top of her class at University of Alabama, she got a huge scholarship.
I think is it Arizona that was the same? Some of the schools actually list the grades and test scores on the website. They have their little matrices and they'll tell you how much they're going to give based on grades and test scores.
Arizona is very upfront. One of my students, same thing, got in there and he was like, oh, I was this close to $5 grand more per year. His mother was not happy, but you just tried a little harder, right? And so here's the thing though, you also don't have to stress about it because as we were talking, I just got a text message from one of my students. The dad just said, my kid just got into Oswego. The kid's ACT score was really low and yet just got in and, so we didn't send it. Right. So because we knew that it wasn't going to be sufficient. So here's a kid that doesn't need to send their score and is still getting into, got into one of his schools he really wants to. I had a kid last year.
And who knows, maybe the family qualifies for the Excelsior scholarship and they're getting free money anyway. because if they got merit scholarships, let me explain this. What happens in New York State at the SUNYs is that, say you get a student gets a merit scholarship, but then they also qualify for Excelsior. Well, Excelsior looks at it as, oh, you're already getting X amount for merit aid. We only need to give you the balance. They're not stacking scholarships. So they won't let you have more than what the Excelsior was worth. So, it may not in that instance even be to your benefit to get merit or to look for any additional scholarships, because you're only going to get that set amount.
Right. Right. And the nice thing about some of the schools going test optional, though, is that it's letting in more kids, the more students that are a little bit more of a range of students, right? So I've got some students, they just can't take a test, right? They are not meant to do standardized tests. It's not their space, but they are, they've started their own business. They are really great academically. They are involved in a lot of clubs and activities. They work, they do all sorts of other things. So in those cases, not sending a test score doesn't really matter, because there's so much else to their application. And when the schools are looking at it holistically, honestly, it doesn't really matter. I worked with a student last cycle. She is now a freshman in an Ivy. Her SAT score was not something we could send anywhere. Forget even sending to an Ivy. It could not go anyplace. But her GPA was strong. She was honor society. She worked. She was a 3-season athlete, and the school wanted her because she had everything else. And they were like, please don't tell us your score. We don't want to know, right? Because first of all, they didn't want it to bring down their numbers. Think about it. Again, college is a business, right? So, when you look at the test optional numbers, and the scores are going higher and higher because only the kids with the higher and higher scores are sending them, right? But that makes that school look better. It's a business. Right. So, you definitely want to think about what makes sense in terms of who to send your score to, but you want to take the test if you can, right? Because these days there's no reason not to anymore. You got to at least give it a shot.
Can we segue? You just mentioned about how colleges are a business. And I just wanted to touch upon that for a minute. So because, going back to the whole college and COVID, and colleges are businesses. So what ended up happening is that a lot of students started going to school closer to home. With the pandemic, people are more comfortable being closer to home. There are a lot of schools out there that their numbers, their enrollments have dropped. And because they're businesses, they need to fill their seats. And because they need to fill their seats, they may offer students discounts to entice them. And those are really merit scholarships. So the key to finding that free money is to be flexible. Your student should not only apply to schools that they see on everybody's bumper sticker or on the sweatshirts that every single kid is wearing, but be flexible with where you're looking and what schools your child is applying to, because you may find more opportunities for scholarship money.
Yep. And if you read my newsletter from last month, that's one of the things I said is what's on the t-shirt is less important than what's in the t-shirt. Right. So, at the end of the day, I had students last year, they're like, oh, I don't know if I want to go to that school. Nobody from my school goes there. I'm like, you've been a leader in everything else you do. I can guarantee 4 years from now, your school is going to be sending a ton of students to that college because you led the way and you proudly wore that t-shirt that nobody recognized. Just saying. A couple more questions for you, Vicki, getting back to Excelsior. This seems to be a hot topic. So can the scholarships in Excelsior be applied to post-high school trade schools in New York, or is it only to the SUNYs and CUNYs?
It depends on if those schools accept FAFSA. I candidly, I'd have to look it up school by school.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, if the school, is enrolled in financial aid programs, then yes, it likely does apply. Let me, what, I can't say that as a blanket statement. Just like I mentioned Ithaca earlier, every private school in New York State handles it a little differently. So, it would have to be, spoken to that specific school's financial aid office if they had one to see what they do if they do.
Mhm. There's something interesting with Ithaca. One of my students just was accepted and he got a nice merit aid, but he also got this nice little bonus. They said, for every year you live on campus, we'll give you $2,000. And he was like, why would they do that? I
That's
said, well,
interesting.
I just happen to know, having gone to school up in Ithaca, that both Cornell and Ithaca are, I won't say at war with the local landlords. That would be kind of a harsh way to state it, but they are definitely fighting back. And so at Cornell, they have created Sophomore Village. So there is so much more housing on campus now than there was before because the landlords are really taking advantage of the students. Ithaca is looking to do a similar thing. And so I thought it was interesting. So by giving them this $2,000 grant, if you will, to live on campus, you make it more enticing to stay on campus.
Right.
And then you don't, the goal is to reduce demand in the town, and hopefully that'll start to bring down the prices a little bit in rent. So it was really interesting. Okay, if my child got into Bing, which scholarship would benefit her more? Would it be the Excelsior or a merit scholarship? And just so you all know, I know that you're all writing Excelsior with an I-A at the end. It's actually Excelsior, like the New York State's motto, Excelsior. So sorry, that was probably my pronunciation up front. My mother's turning over in her grave because I didn't say it right. Sorry.
Excelsior is for a set amount. It's tuition at Bing. So, assuming it's, I don't even know the exact number offhand, assuming it's $7,500, what's the merit scholarship worth? And if the merit scholarship from Bing is worth $5,000 and you also qualify for Excelsior, they're going to give you that additional $2,500. So you're still getting $7,500 no matter how you cut and slice it.
Right. And just to give you all a feel, Bing, Stony Brook, their tuition is running about 10 grand a year these days. Just tuition, not room and board.
So it's Bing, Stony Brook, Buffalo, and Albany. And those are the state universities. But then there are also the state colleges like Oneonta, Geneseo, Oswego, and a whole bunch of others. What's interesting about the universities as compared to the colleges is that the colleges are about $1,800 a year less than the universities. So if that is a consideration, you should just, be aware.
Mm-hmm. But honestly, my daughter's at Stony Brook, and I checked how much I spent in tuition last year. It was $10,457. Man, you cannot.
Wait. Was that tuition or tuition plus fees?
Tuition and fees. It was, so she lives at home, so it didn't include that, but it did include meals. No textbooks, that's on her. But I was just like, for that kind of money, you cannot even.
No, but my guess is that it's tuition plus fees.
Yep.
And that's why I was saying like the $7,500, and then the fees is then on the household.
Fair enough. Next question has to do with Five Towns College, which happens to be a for-profit school as opposed to a non-for-profit school. So my son is going to Five Towns College in New York. Would the Excelsior scholarship help him?
I don't, that's, it's going to be on, because it's a private, you'd have to speak directly to the school itself and see if they do anything comparable.
Yeah, interesting. I don't know, because you figure it's a for-profit.
So yeah, nothing specifically through New York. I'm not sure. Yeah, you'd have to speak to them.
So be worth a phone call though over to financially and ask them.
Certainly, definitely.
Yep. So the last piece in terms of, the impact that I was also starting to look at this year, you have the academics, you have the tests, you have the activities, you also have recommendation letters. So when I think about what became really important this year, it was your grades, the rigor of your classes, your activities were a little bit less so, but recommendation letters became even more important this year because they were looking for data points. But the hard part was if you were online and you didn't have those opportunities to interact with your teachers to make those connections. So what I found is a lot of schools are a little bit more fluid in terms of the recommendation letters. Some are allowing a lot more others. So while the teacher recs are still important, and you want to make sure your students, if they're spending a lot of time still virtually, online, or even if they're in the classroom, you want to make sure they make those connections with the teachers so that the teachers are able to write good letters for them. And you're not looking necessarily for teachers where your student got an A. a lot of times what you want to find are those classes where your child really worked hard. Maybe they struggled a little bit. Maybe they had some obstacles to overcome. And that teacher saw all the work that they put in, the effort they made to do well, even if that doing well was a C or a B in the class, right? So the recommendation letters are still important, as well as your connections outside, because a lot of schools are looking for those still. Some are not, because they're still very focused, but it's things to consider, right? Because there's all the different aspects of the application all add up to hopefully a great package, right? The other big piece of the application is the essay. Now, fortunately, COVID, I'm going to say, didn't really have an impact on the essay. However, the Common App, which is the application most schools are using these days that our kids apply to. I mean, if you apply to California schools, you're applying through the UC system or Cal State system. If you're applying through SUNYs, you can use the SUNY system. CUNYs are the CUNY system. But a vast majority are on the Common App, but most of the applications now have a space to write about how are you impacted by COVID, right? And so that was on for the last 2 years. I'm going to guess it's going to be on again next year. So for the juniors in the room, I'm going to anticipate you'll still see that. And people have been answering that question in a variety of ways. I have some students whose grades just tanked during remote learning. So they wrote about that. Then they also wrote about what they learned and how they've grown because of that. But some of my students who have made it, flipped it and has had an opportunity to do better in something, whether it be their activities, wherever, they talked a little bit about that. Or if they were the ones at home looking after their younger siblings, right? The impact on their family. So I think COVID has definitely changed the way the application works, the pieces that are important. It's obviously impacted the business side of the colleges and the financial side. I'm gonna be really curious to see what the numbers look like this year in terms of yield for these colleges. Will enrollment go up or down? A lot of people were afraid that during the previous cycle that a lot of students were going to take gap years. So there would be an overwhelming bigger number of students, being on campus this year than last year. And really the only place I saw that was at Tulane. Like Tulane definitely had too many students apply. And so this year they and accept and show up. And so this year they are accepting even fewer students. So Tulane has managed to even up their credentials, if you will, and make their acceptance rate even tougher because of it. So there's a variety of places that you just have to think about, what has COVID done? What's going to be long-term, right? And so I think long-term, schools will say, a lot of them will stay test optional, but they're going to use the scores when they show up because it's a good data point. They're going to be much more fluid in terms of their academics and how they offer programs to students. They're going to be looking for the kids who are really resilient and found ways to still stay active. So it's going to be interesting to see, the long-lasting effects here. I mean, those are the pieces I'm seeing coming out. Vicki, anything I missed that you would add to that?
The one thought that I've been having is that also with New York State, is there anybody here not from New York State? I mean, if you are, I'd love to just see where you're from if you wanted to write it in the chat box. And this may also be, it may also be happening in other states, I don't know. But due to the pandemic, because of, we've been talking about ways to save, partially ways to save money on the cost of college and the impact of the pandemic. It's also impacting different professions. So for some of our kids, our students who want to go into teaching or healthcare, there are definitely financial incentives through New York State, at least, and I'm sure other states too, for the kids to go into those fields now because there are so many of those workers that are needed. I was reading that for New York State, they're projecting 180,000 teachers to retire within the next 10 years, and then it may even go up because people are retiring early because of the pandemic. So yeah, New York State is grappling with how are we going to fill all those teacher positions. So they want to create incentives, including, college and, minimizing student loans or paying off that debt or whatever they can do to get kids into those professions. And same thing also for healthcare workers. So if those are of interest to your children, definitely pursue, and, let's discuss those opportunities, if you wish. Anyway, so that was a thought that came into my head as far as college and COVID. We're talking about all the ways to save. Let's see what the state could do for us too.
Absolutely. And with the huge infusion of cash, right? And it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. A couple more questions. So Excelsior. Does Excelsior apply only to tuition or for room and board and books too?
It is only for tuition. It does not cover room and board. It doesn't cover fees. However, that said, I have clients that I work with and I'm on Long Island, and a student can live at home and attend, whether it's Stony Brook, whether it's Nassau Community, whether it's SUNY Farmingdale or Old Westbury or any of the SUNYs on Long Island. That child can live at home, attend school for free because they get free tuition, and then just need to pay those additional fees, whether it's lab fees and parking fees, and then also their textbooks. But even with textbooks, my son graduated from SUNY Buffalo. He's actually still there for grad school right now. The books in the bookstore he found were cheaper than if he went on to Chegg or Amazon or any of those others. So he's never had huge book expenses. So, the bookstores could be good opportunities also in terms of saving money.
Absolutely. Next question came in, a little bit different question, but my daughter's a senior. So just so you know, commitment date is May 1st, right? That's the day. By April 1st, all the colleges have to tell you whether or not you've been accepted, waitlisted, denied. Occasionally there's a hiccup on that, but that's the date. May 1st is the deadline for students to tell the college which one they're going to. Highly recommend you don't wait till May 1st and you do it by like April 28th. So just in case something goes wrong with the system.
But don't rush and do it now. There's no need to rush to put down a deposit.
No, absolutely not. Wait till you see all your options and you see your entire financial aid package and you can compare apples to apples, which is really hard, but we'll get to that. So the question is, she's trying to decide between SUNY Oswego and University of New Haven. So you've got a SUNY in New York, obviously, and then University of New Haven's in Connecticut. So in-state, out-of-state. For at least, I'm assuming this person lives in one of those two states. I'd be eligible for Excelsior. There you go. How would I make the determination how much each college will cost before actually committing?
At this stage, come March or so is when your child will receive their financial aid award letters. Honestly, my recommendation is to be patient, wait for March to get those financial award letters, and then compare apples to apples. It's pretty easy to know what SUNY will offer you. However, because New Haven's a private school, it's not as cut and dry. I would just wait and be patient. Don't send a deposit yet.
And make sure when you're starting to look at those numbers, I mean, Vicki's the expert on this, but loans versus grants, right? There's all sorts of words that they use to say this is a grant, right? So that means money you don't have to repay. Scholarships.
Well, grants and scholarships. You want grants and scholarships. You don't want anything where it says student loans. I mean, let me rephrase that. Sometimes you don't have a choice. Going in, you're going to have to take out student loans. You want to minimize those as low as possible. So, look for all the free money first.
Yeah. So, Vicki, another question that came up today with one of my prospects was, she knows she's going to need to take other loans out. And she's like, I heard about the Parent Plus. And that was kind of my reaction when she said it. You want to talk a little bit about that?
There are different, so there are basically three different loan types. You have the student loans that the students can take out that I referenced earlier that you get from filling out FAFSA, up to $5,500 freshman year. And then should your family need more in student loans for your student to attend, the parents typically have a choice between either Parent Plus loans or private loans. Now, private loans the parent or the student can take out, but the student will still need a cosigner. So you, the parent, is potentially on the hook either way. The thing that gets me so crazy about this is that whether it's private loans or whether it's the parent plus loans, how is it going to impact you moving forward? I mean, I hate to put it like this. None of us are kids. I mean, you know, retirement isn't that far away. You know, I don't want you to eat up, you know, any potential chance of you being able to retire because, you know, a family has all of these loans that they have to pay back. So, I mean, I'm being totally honest. I would rather see a child go to a less expensive university, and may it be, you know, even if it's not their dream school, even if the school doesn't have a lazy river, even if they don't have the beautiful view overlooking, you know, whatever, you know, it doesn't have to be all that glamorous. You know, they need a good education. I'd rather you not, I'd rather parents and students not jeopardize their financial futures because of the cost of a college. Yeah. So if that's possible.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I look at it and think, you know, a lot of times our kids think they need the idyllic scenery, they need to be at the
right.
Big Ten football, they need this, they need that, you know, and the schools are really pushing that. So if you go visit a Notre Dame, an Ohio State, right, you're going to see these phenomenal facilities, you're going to see beautiful dorms, but at the end of the day, what's the education? Right? What are you getting from that school? And obviously Notre Dame and Ohio State are great schools, right? But at the end of the day, is you want the best education for your child, right? And sometimes, depending on the major that they want, that might be at a school that's
Definitely.
lesser known, that might be a little smaller, that is looking for kids like yours, right? So I had some really interesting students this year that applied to, you know, off the beaten path colleges, but they're getting a lot of money from them because they're very bright and they're in the programs that are right for them. And they're going to do great at these schools and then be able to go for the masters that they need afterwards, because they're going to do really well, have the engagement that they need, and get into great master's programs.
Well, and you just said, you know, a couple of things come to mind. First of all, you know your students best. Are they going to want to continue for a master's afterwards? You know, that's another huge expense. I mean, depending on what they want to go for, you know, maybe it's best to go to a low-cost undergraduate program, whether it's, you know, on merit scholarships, whether it's, you know, an in-state university, and save those huge loans or, you know, whatever it is, save the extra funds for graduate school. Whatever that program may be, or consider what they want to major in. So for instance, say your child wants to go into teaching. Are they going to be better served by going to whatever out-of-state university or private in-state university and taking on, you know, the huge debt, as opposed to, you know, going to, say, you know, an in-state university? They're going to come out, you know, in both of those scenarios, they still have to take the same licensing test. They're still likely going to work in the same district and earn the same amount of money. Is it worth the added expenditure to go to the, you know, the other school? You know, but then also consider, you know, what if your child, you know, has this certain career path that they want to go on? Maybe it can only be fulfilled by going to a certain type of university that has that specific program and, you know, those contacts for future employment. And, you know, maybe that path will guarantee a certain level of, you know, salary and economic growth for the individual, you know. So maybe in that case, the undergraduate investment, you know, is worth it. You know, you have to, you know, think about those things and analyze, you know, what makes sense for your family.
Right. And, you know, one of our participants brought up a great point. She's like, after graduating college, virtually no employer has asked me where I went to undergrad. I'm a lawyer and law school is all they care about. And the same thing often holds true for business school. If one of my closest friends, her kid went to, I'll call it a no-name university. It was a great school for 4 years undergrad, but got into every Ivy and Stanford for her postdoc and finished up at Harvard for organic chemistry, right? Nobody's ever going to ask her where she got her undergraduate degree. Right. So it really does depend on the on what you're looking to do. I'm going to take one or two last questions. So we've got one here. This is slightly different. This is, can you address the push at some high schools to have honors level students take more AP classes because they're eliminating the honors level in some subjects? Do colleges care about APs, or just non-weighted grades? So I'll say this. I have plenty of students get into really good programs without having 6 AP courses in their senior year. I have students who take for their science their senior year, forensics, marine biology, anatomy, right? None of those are even honors level at many schools. So it really depends on what your student is going for. Now, I was on, like I said, today with Clarkson, RIT, and WPI, and Clarkson was like, you know, we want minimal, we need 4 years of science, we need 4 years of math. Obviously, it's a STEM, it's an engineering program, right? And so they're taking AP calculus would be really helpful. Taking AP physics might be really helpful. Right? So it depends on where you want to go and what you want to do. AP physics for somebody who wants to be an English teacher is useless, right? I mean, you don't need it. You really don't. Now, if you're interested in it, that's a whole different ballgame. And if you want to take it, again, whole different ballgame. But you know, what they're looking for is rigor, especially in the courses that align with your interest. They're looking for the grades that go with it. You know, if you're getting all hundreds and you're taking Regents level classes or honors level classes, well, the school's going to go, why didn't they try APs? Right? Why didn't you try and extend a little bit and do that? But if you're getting 90s in those honors classes, they may not be like, okay, you know, I get that. But are you pushing yourself in the places that make sense? And you don't want to overstress your students, right? I mean, I think we all kind of get caught up in this wheel of more and more APs, more and more APs. And some students, I see this in a lot of schools now, the senior year, they're pretty much only taking AP classes. Like, when do you breathe? Right? Because if you're doing that and you're trying to do some activities and potentially you are studying for the AP, for the SAT and ACT as, let's say, as a junior, right? When do these kids breathe? When do they have some fun? When do they get to be themselves a little more relaxed, right? And I think that as parents, like I say this to the students I work with, you need to do the best you can in the highest level classes that make sense for you. So this year I had one student, her guidance counselor recommended that she take AP Bio and that she take honors level social studies, right? Government and macro. And I said to her, I'm like, I'm looking at your science grades. They don't look that great. And I'm looking at your social studies grades and they look phenomenal. And I know you love social studies. What are we doing? And she was like, oh, my guidance counselor said. And so I said, does your guidance counselor know who you are? She's like, no, she's brand new. I just got her. I'm like, oh, maybe you need to go back and have a discussion with her and tell her what you really love. So she swapped. So I got her last summer. She was able to still swap her classes. She took marine biology at her school and AP Gov and AP Macro. And guess what? She's getting great grades in all 3 of those classes, right? Instead of struggling in bio and not living up to her potential in the social studies. So it really, do what's right for your kid. At the end of the day, high schools aren't necessarily businesses too, but I will say this, we also, you know, every time it comes out in the paper about how many students graduated from the school, went on to these colleges, you know, the private schools, 2 of my students go to very elite private schools in the city, and their brochures only talk about the top 10 schools that their kids get into. I know they also go to SUNY Albany and SUNY New Paltz, some of those kids, but they don't publicize that, right? So you want to do what's best for your kid. That's what's really most important. So that's my last note. Vicki, any last notes for you before we wrap it up for 8 o'clock?
Last note. You know, you were talking about the high schools. Yeah, the high schools have been, you know, I believe the question said, you know, about getting rid of the honors programs. I mean, that kind of goes back to, you know, why the state has to incentivize students going into teaching. You know, there are less teachers in the school able to run all those classes. Do you need honors plus AP? You know, I think there's a lot, you know, why it's happening. Yeah, we'd like there to be every possible, combination and permutation of classes that our kids can take, but financially, it's probably not feasible for our schools to do it.
Right, absolutely. So with that, I'm going to share our contact information with everybody. So that way, if you are looking to reach out to either one of us, Vicki and I are more than happy to schedule some time with you so we can talk a little bit more about what we do, who we are, so you can jot down our information here if you don't already have it. We will be sending out a recording of today's webinar, and we post them on our websites. Like there's access to them through our websites, you can get to that too. So by all means, we were really happy to have you here today. It's always nice to get such great questions. So thank you for being interactive with us on that. And if you ever have any last questions, by all means, shoot us a text. Always happy to do the interaction, and join us next time, because Vicki and I tend to do these a lot, right? So keep an eye out for our next webinar. It's always good to have repeats where we can kind of build off one another.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.